Hi everyone, thanks for joining today's webinar, Beefing Up Vizzes with Titles, Labels, and Tooltips. This session is part of our customer webinar series, Talk Data to Me, which is aimed to provide tips, tricks, and how-tos to make you a smarter Tableau customer. My name is Megan Fay, and I'm part of the marketing team here at Tableau, and I'll be your moderator. Just a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. All lines are currently muted. If you have a question, please use the Q&A window. We'll answer questions at the end if time allows. And a recording of this webinar and a copy of the workbook will be emailed out after the webinar. With that, I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Saskia Van Dahl. Saskia is a product consulting manager here at Tableau, and we'll be discussing how to make an immediate difference on how people see and understand your data in Tableau dashboards with textual information. Saskia, take it away.
Thanks, Megan. So hi, everyone. My name is Saskia, and I am a product consultant based out of our London office. So good morning to all everyone who's joining us from the United States. Good afternoon to everyone joining us from Europe. So today's session, as Megan already introduced, is going to be all about text. So we're going to talk about the places where we find text in Tableau. And we'll also talk about how we can really get the most out of the text that we can use. To do that, we're going to first look at tooltips, and then we're also going to turn to dashboards and look at how we can really leverage titles on those dashboards. So why do we even care, right? Some of you might wonder. Think about the best Tableau dashboard that you have made, and then just think about it in your mind's eye and think about the people that are using it. Each and every time someone interacts with that dashboard, they will come across a tooltip, right? So you really want to make sure that those tooltips are the most interesting and insightful that they can be. And that's what we're going to spend the first part of the session on how you can really leverage those. So let's get started. So the data that we're using today is all about a very important sporting event. Maybe we can have a little competition. If you think you know what sport this is about, just put it in the chat. So I'm going to give you a minute to do that. So for those of you who are new to Tableau, you might wonder, what is a tooltip? So a tooltip is that information that comes up when you hover over a mark. So right now I'm hovering over Brazil, and I got told by Tableau, okay, the country is Brazil, which is really helpful. And by the way, some of you have already guessed correctly what's happening here. I think the first one to guess correctly is Natalie. Congratulations, it is football or soccer to all the Americans. So well done, you get a virtual high five, Natalie. So this data is historic data from the Football World Cups. And I presented this session last year, so unfortunately it only goes up until the World Cup in 2010. And we'll see the consequences of that in a little bit. But let's get back to tooltips. So as I said, they reflect the information about the mark itself. These tooltips will update automatically and then incorporate the new information you might put into the view. So right now, I'm only displaying the countries where a World Cup was hosted. But if I bring in new information, so I'm also looking at attendance, my view changes and my tooltip also changes. So now I can also see the attendance for the United States. So that's just an intro to tooltips. They will reflect the information that is in your view, which in my case is this dimension and this measure. However, I can also display information in my tooltip that isn't in the view. So let's take this measure goals and just put it on the tooltip mark right here. So now we can see the total goals that were shot in Mexico in the tooltip, but that information is not represented in the view itself. So that's just a really quick introduction for all of you that are new to Tableau. And of course, I hope this highlights also why it is important to pay attention to these tooltips, because the beauty of Tableau is that you create these engaging and interactive dashboards. And part of that interactivity is going to be people clicking and hovering over your dashboards. All right, so let's turn this up a notch. So let's look at a view where we're looking at how many times different countries have won the World Cup. And this is where it gets painfully obvious that we're missing data from last year. So as you might have noticed from my accent, I'm German. And of course, it upsets me that this only shows Germany winning the World Cup 3 times, when in fact that should be 4. But let's get back to tooltips again. The default tooltip that Tableau will show you is going to be this sort of tabular format right here, where it gives you the name of the field, a colon, and then the value. So in this case, nation is Germany. But in many, and this is great in a lot of cases, right? But in some cases, you might want to customize this and format the tooltip to really bring out that information. And I'm going to show you a few tricks how you can make that easy and also really useful for the end user. So one thing to note, if you've been with Tableau for a while, is that we introduced these instant tooltips. So you can actually see as I change from one country to the other, the tooltip doesn't disappear and reappear, but the information updates immediately. So that gives the user a very nice sort of seamless interaction with the marks. Now, if I want to go and edit that tooltip, I can just go to my marks card and go onto the tooltip button right here. And that will bring up a text editing box. And this is rich text also, so we can do a bunch of fun things with this. But before we get into doing a little bit of formatting, I just want to go back to the new sort of instant tooltips that we have in Tableau. If you are in a pre-9.0 version of Tableau, you will not have this option, but don't worry. All the other things will apply that you see in the session. So it used to be the case that we showed the tooltips only on hover, and now they're instant, and that's just a great sort of end user experience right here. But you, of course, could toggle between these two options. All right. So it does make sense to get away a little from the default formatting that Tableau provides. And just a few steps here could really make this a bit more enticing. So for example, I might just want to display the nation as the sort of title of the tooltip. And then I have some weird spaces here that I'm just going to remove and maybe organize my tabs in a little bit. And we have this handy little tab organizer ruler here at the top. And I'm just going to line them up so it looks a bit better, and maybe change the color on this. So this took me about 2 seconds, and it already looks a bit neater. We have a big title, and we have tabs that are, just a little bit more neatly organized. Now, of course, this is the very first step we took, so we're actually going to take this up a few notches over the next few tricks here. So you've seen how you can use that default that Tableau provides and just change that up a little. But you can also completely ignore that format altogether. Because one thing that people do really nicely, and you don't even have to train them on that, is that they can read sentences really well. And you can actually use that to tell a story about a specific mark in Tableau. so that now when I hover over a mark, the tooltip tells me a story. So it tells me that from 1930 to 2010, Uruguay has appeared 11 times in World Cup finals. And then again, this updates for each and every country that I hover over. So you might have noticed that in my marks card here, there is a number of measures and dimensions, but most of them don't actually appear in the view itself. Because here, as you can see, we have the nation, the country, and the number of times that that country won. So there's actually a lot of information here that isn't displayed in the view. And that's why tooltips can be so important, because you can just provide that extra bit of information. Let's take a look at how I did this. Again, I just opened up the tooltip editor. And so this looks different than the first one I showed you, because we're now quite a far way away from that default format that Tableau provided. Because now I actually typed in some of my own text where I said, from the minimum year to the maximum year, give me a country that I hover over, and then I'm going to write out they have appeared X many times in the World Cup finals. Now, in the beginning, we saw how when you add new fields to the view, they get automatically added to your tooltip. If you add new measures or dimensions, you can also insert them to your tooltip directly. And let's just see what that looks like. So there's this little box here where you can insert. And then here at the bottom, all the measures and dimensions that I could be adding to this. So for example, I could just put this in here, and you always know that it's a field from your data source because it has these little brackets on the side. Just one thing to note, if you do go on this insert field and you can't see the field that you want to add to your tooltip, that's because it's not on your view. So any field you want to add has to be either on your rows and columns, or it has to be somewhere here on your marks card. If that isn't the case, just add it, and then you'll be able to add it to your tooltip as well. And then it was just a matter of reorganizing these fields so they fitted nicely into the sentence that I wrote. And just one thing that I actually didn't know for a very long time, but was really glad when I found out, is that you don't have to highlight the entire field if you want to make changes to it. You can actually just place your cursor in the middle, and then you can make changes, like, for example, changing the color. That might seem like a small thing, but if you do this a lot, that will change you a lot of time. Okay, so now we've seen how we can actually use text in a tooltip to tell a story about a mark that is dynamic and will change depending on where I go. All right, let's move on to my next tip. So before I tell you a bit more about the tip, let's spend a brief second just letting you know about this very important analysis that I did with the data from all the World Cups. Is because, I mean, I'm German, so I like football, but I also like beer. And I wanted to know, when is the best or worst time for me to go to the bar to order more beer when I'm watching a football match? So I was actually looking at the time of in the game and the number of goals that were shot over this whole historic period. And we can see that there are some times where there's a lot of action, and there are some times when there isn't so much. So there seems to be a bit of a lull here towards the end of the first half. So by the way, blue is first half, orange is second half, and gray is extra time. So there's a bit of a quiet period here, but then a huge increase in action towards the end of the first half. And then again, we see that towards the end of the second half as well, because that's, the end of the match and players are getting desperate, and there's typically a lot of action. And that's typically also a bad time for you to go and get beer. So feel free to use this when you plan your next sort of football match in the pub. But let's get back to the matter at hand. So one great thing about these tooltips that we haven't yet seen is that they also come with some extra options here. So these little command buttons where you can keep only, exclude, group, set, or view the underlying data. These options are amazing when you are just getting to know your data, when you're doing your analysis, when you're in that sort of data discovery mode. These options are also exposed to your end user when they're consuming or just viewing that dashboard on Tableau Server or Tableau Online or Tableau Public. So one thing you want to keep in mind is who the users are that are interacting with your view, because it's not a rule so much about tooltips, but about dashboard design in general, is that you always want to keep your audience in mind. Because it could be that you're building a dashboard for people that are not yet very familiar with Tableau. So it could be that they're clicking on an interesting mark. So let's say this spike in action here in the 75th minute, and then they might say, okay, what does this do? I'm going to keep this. And then everything disappears and they freak out, right? They get really nervous. They think they broke it. They don't know how to get back yet because they're not familiar with Tableau. So what you can do is actually turn off those command buttons, because there might be cases where either you don't need them or where you actually don't want to expose that functionality to the end user. And again, we can do that over the tooltip editing box. There's just a little checkbox here where you can include or, again, bring back the command buttons. So now I don't even have that option. I just have the text. There can also be a case where you don't actually want to show a tooltip at all. I mean, I just said to you multiple times now that tooltips are very important, but there can be cases where you don't want to show tooltips. For example, if you have a crosstab that is really detailed, a tooltip might not show you additional information because all the numbers that you're interested in are already in that table. And in that case, of course, you have the option to also just turn the tooltip off altogether, so that now when someone hovers, they don't see anything at all. So it's just good to be aware of your options here. So we've looked at formatting the tooltip to tell a bit of a story about your mark. And I just want to take that a step further by actually teaching you a little trick about conditional formatting. So we're on the same view here, but this time I formatted my tooltip so that it shows me that in this minute 41, there were 50% less golds shot than in the minute before. And this, of course, is about across all the years that we collected the data in. If I move to another mark, this one tells me 22% more golds have been shot in this minute. And you can see how it changes from more to less and green to red. And this was accomplished using conditional formatting. So what this means is that I've created a very simple calculated field. And I'm going to show that to you in just a second. But let's take a look at the tooltip first. So again, this looks similar than the one that we've just seen where I tell a little story. I've just added 2 fields to this, and you can already see one is colored green and one is colored red. And as I said, I also needed to make these 2 calculated fields. And let's just take a look real quick as to what they contain. So this is a very simple sort of Boolean or logic calculation, rather. It's not a Boolean per se. That just checks that if the difference is larger than 0, then there's more. And I mean, the flip side of this is if it's been less than 0, then there was less. So I didn't actually have to write this out. So it's super simple. And just the inverse of this I've done again for less. And the result of this is just a string, either less or more. And one will only show up when it's true. That means also that the other will not show up, of course. So then that just gives us this really simple and easy option to just include these in the tooltip. And of course, for each mark, only one of them is ever true. So they won't show up at the same time and it looks confusing. It can always be either more or less. So this is just a really simple trick that just adds this sort of extra to your tooltip and makes it super dynamic and really easy to understand as well. And this is one thing that you might have noticed here about this view is that my labels for these lines have these little shapes here that you also see repeated in the tooltip. So the arrow up and arrow down for positive or negative change here. And this is a neat trick that I stole from Alan Eldridge. If anyone of you knows him, he's an amazing Tableau sales consultant. And this is pretty easily done. It's just the number formatting on the label. So I'm using number of records here on as my label. And I'll just show you really quickly that when I format this, I actually have this option to apply custom formatting to my number so that instead of a negative sign for negative values, I'm using these ASCII characters for up and down, and for no change, of course, there's no symbol here. So this is just a really neat trick that sort of emphasizes the movement from 1 minute to the next. So feel free to steal that as well from Alan. He will not mind. So moving on to my last tip about tooltips here is just an example how you can take this conditional formatting and apply it to a fun example here. So in this case, I'm actually showing how many times a particular country won gold, silver, or bronze in the World Cup. And again, this is dynamic upon the country. So when I go to Germany, we see it won 3 times. It should be 4. We all know that. And this is a similar method on what we did before. It just has another neat little trick that you can steal. So what I did here is, again, I calculated some extra fields, and we'll look at the tooltip, for gold, silver, and bronze. And I colored them in the corresponding colors. And I will show you just really quickly what one of these looks like. All right, so this is just a simple string manipulation where I'm taking actually, instead of a string, just a bunch of circles. Again, these are ASCII characters. And I'm just taking the left of however many times someone came in 3rd place. So this is super simple, but I think overall it took me 2 minutes to set this whole thing up. But I hope you can see that the effect is really pretty neat. And maybe you can think of an occasion where you can apply that in some of your own dashboards. All right, so we have a few minutes left, and I do want to answer some of the questions you might have. But before we do that, just one thing I want to leave you with is that another thing where text gets really useful and important is in titles in your dashboard. So one thing I just want to leave you with is this is a dashboard that is, of course, very simple, but I see these things a lot is where you don't give any meaningful titles to your dashboard. You actually call it exactly what it is. People will know that this is a time series. So just spend a few seconds on giving it a bit more of a meaningful title. So you could say these are goals over time. And you might also want to tell people if there is interactivity in the view, that they should just try and click on one of these years, right? Because you know that you put actions in here that make this interactive, but the users might not know. So just put that in somewhere so people can really leverage all that interactivity. And again, the same would go here. I think everyone can see that this is a map. You don't actually need to write that there. So you could say these are goals per country. And then you might even go a step further and tell people what the year is that was actually selected. So again, these function very much like the tooltip edit boxes, where you can insert fields. And these will be dynamic on your selection. So I selected 1982, and these are all the goals scored by different countries in the years of 1982. And again, I could do the same and then click on France and see French players in the specific year. And again, I could say, okay, these are all the top scorers from this particular country. So this is, again, super simple stuff. And this is really just an introduction to this. So you can hopefully see how you can, again, make just a little bit more with your titles in Tableau. So I know I've spent most of the time in the session talking about tooltips, but that's mainly because a lot of the formatting applies to tooltips in the same way that it does, for example, for labels. So you have the same sort of rich text editing box for labels as you have for tooltips. And you could apply similar sort of conditional formatting if you wanted to for labels as well. And then, again, as we see here in the view, think also about titles that you're using in your dashboard and how you really can make them useful and meaningful. So if you have any questions on what you've just shown here, feel free to just type them in the Q&A box. And so I know a couple of you are asking me to go back to some of the calculated fields here. I realize that I'm showing this really quickly to you, but you will have this workbook and the recording of the session afterwards. So you can actually download the workbook and sort of reverse engineer what I've done here. So don't worry if that was too quick for you.
Hi, Saskia. Thanks for that great presentation. I know I learned quite a bit to enhance my dashboards personally. We do have a couple questions that have come in. One from Greg. He's asking, when using the conditional formatting formulas and the values are null, is there a space inserted where the empty value is?
So I just want to make sure that I understand the question. So let's look at this example where I used the conditional formatting. So in this case, we won't have any nulls because there is only two options to our condition. But if it doesn't apply, so sorry, I think now I understand the question. Sorry, that took me a while. So in this case, this condition is checked for each and every mark. And because it doesn't hold for some of these marks, that's where it just won't show up. And actually, it will be not really a space here because I've put both of them here together. So if one doesn't show up, the other will. So you won't see any like weird spaces here when you use this kind of technique. But again, feel free to download the workbook after that's been posted to the site, because you can actually just review what I've done here if you want to apply any of these tricks to your own workbooks.
All right, we have time for one more question. Natalie's asking, she's wondering about whether there's a way to set a default tooltip formatting. So for example, if she always wanted her tooltips to look a certain way with a certain font or size, is there a setting within Tableau that can do that and will be applied to every new viz she makes?
So that's a great question. The answer to that is maybe not necessarily what you're looking for. So right now there isn't really a way for that. In the way that that would be carried over from sheet to sheet, because the tooltips, since they are dynamic and dependent on sort of the dimensions and measures that you also place into your view, that's why the formatting that you apply to them is also going to be dependent on the sheet itself. But if that's something that you would make your life easier and you'd be interested in, I'm not sure if you're aware that we actually have a page on our website that collects all the ideas that you guys have about the product. So Natalie, if there's something that you would like to see in the product, feel free to check our ideas page. If that idea is already up there, you can vote it up. If not, you can actually submit an idea yourself.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank you for a great presentation, Saskia. And I'd like to thank everyone who attended today. I will be sending out the workbook that was used and a recording of this webinar within the next day or two, so keep an eye out for that. And we do run regular webinars within this Talk Data to Me webinar series, so make sure to check out the other webinars and register. This session was part of a Tableau conference session, and so if you're looking for more sessions on this or to see Saskia present in person, I encourage you to register for our upcoming conference in Las Vegas in October. I'll also include information on that in the follow-up email. So with that, thank you, and I hope everyone has a great day.